Hello everyone. Now that we know more about artificial intelligence, it's better I share with you what are the difference between the artificial intelligence and the traditional programming. It's better if we understand the difference between the artificial intelligence and the traditional programming. You know we are in the age of artificial intelligence. So one day I found someone doing coding. I couldn't differentiate whether they were working on an artificial intelligence or they were just doing the normal coding tasks. At the end of this video, you will come to understand that there is a difference between the coding, traditional coding, and the artificial intelligence. Now, artificial intelligence and traditional programming, they are both approaches to solving computational problems, but they differ fundamentally in how solutions are created. They differ on how systems behave and how knowledge is shared. One of the difference is in the core concept. For example, in traditional programming, humans explicitly define rules and logic for the computer to follow. For example, you can give input, you apply the rules which are the code, then you get an output. Now, the programmer determines every step the system must execute, which means every step that system executes is predetermined by the programmer. Now, in artificial intelligence, specifically to talk about machine learning based systems, the system learn patterns from data instead of being explicitly programmed for every rule. For example, you can provide it with input plus data. The system implements a learning algorithm. Then the algorithm gives a model. The model provides an output. Now, here the system discover the rules automatically. Now, another core difference is in the rule creation versus the learning. Now, traditional programming, rules are manually written by humans. For example, logic is fixed and deterministic. There is no adaptation unless code is changed. But in artificial intelligence, the rules are learned from data. The systems adapt over time, and the system can improve performance automatically. Now, what is it that connect this to the philosophy of human being, the study of world? Now, there was a philosopher called Immanuel Kant. Kant emphasized structured reasoning and categories of understanding. Now, in traditional programming, here reflect fixed categories of thoughts. Now, artificial intelligence reflects the adaptive interpretation of experience. For example, perception without concept is blind. Concept without perceptions are empty. Those are the statement of Immanuel Kant. Now, this mirrors the balance between rules, which are the concepts, and data experience. Another core difference relies on the flexibility and the adaptability. In traditional programming, it is too rigid. It breaks when unexpected inputs occur. It requires manual updates. But artificial intelligence is more flexible. It handles uncertainty. It improves with exposure to new data. Now, there was a philosopher called David Hume. Hume argued that knowledge is based on experience, not certainty. He said, all knowledge degenerates into probability. Artificial intelligence reflects philosophy by operating on probabilities rather than certain fixed outcomes, unlike traditional programming. Another core difference lies on the problem-solving approach. In traditional programming, we have a step-by-step procedural logic based for well-defined problems. But in artificial intelligence, it uses pattern recognition and inference. It handles complex, ambiguous problems. Now, there was a philosopher called Plato. Plato distinguished between ideal form and imperfect reality. Now, in traditional programming, works like fixed ideal rules. But in artificial intelligence, it works with imperfect real-world data approximations. Now, Plato said, opinion is the medium between knowledge and ignorance. But artificial intelligence often operates in this, it often operates in this probabilities middle space. Now, another core difference is in how they handle uncertainty. Traditional programming cannot handle uncertainty well. It requires complete and structured input. But in artificial intelligence, it is designed for uncertainty. It uses statistical models and probabilities. There was a philosopher called Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, Nietzsche challenged absolute certainty and objective truth. And Nietzsche said, there is no fact, there is only interpretations. There is no fact, only interpretation. Artificial intelligence systems similarly interpret data rather than relying on absolute fixed rules. Another core difference is in the human role in the system. Now, traditional programming, human is fully responsible for the logic and the behavior, and computer is purely a tool executing instructions. While in artificial intelligence, human defines learning frameworks, machines develop internal representation. Now, talking about this, there's a philosopher called Socrates, also associated with Plato's dialogue. Now, Socrates emphasized questioning and discovery rather than fixed answers. Artificial intelligence system relies through questioning data. Now, traditional programming imposes answers directly. Another core difference is in the determinism versus the interpretation of meaning. For example, when you talk about traditional programming, it was two deterministic outcomes. If the same input always produces same output. But in artificial intelligence, probabilistic outcomes, the outputs may vary based on training and context. I may ask ChatGPT what is the temperature or what based on recommending me the clothes to wear today. And this another person asks the same question. The output will differ, but in traditional programming, we'll get the same output. Now, there was a philosopher called Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer argued that reality is shaped by perception and interpretation. Artificial intelligence mirrors this by producing output based on learning interpretation of data patterns. Another core difference lies on the ethical and human dimension. When you talk about traditional programming, the behavior is predictable and controlled. Ethical concerns are mostly in design stage. But when you talk about artificial intelligence, it can behave unpredictably. It raises ethical concerns, that is bias, fairness, and counter. Now, when we talk about the philosophy of Jesus in connection to this, Jesus emphasized moral responsibility, intention, and judgment of actions. And it is written in the book of Matthew, chapter 7, verse 12. Do to others what you would have them to do to you. This highlights the importance of ethical reasoning. Sometimes artificial intelligence lacks inherently and must be externally enforced. Another core difference relies on the simplicity versus the emergence. Now, traditional programming was very simple and explicit logic, had very simple and explicit logic. There was no emergent behavior. Now, when we talk about AI, it is much more complex behavior. It has much more complex behavior, which emerge from data and training. It is often difficult to interpret internally. Now, there was a philosopher called Floyd Dostoevsky. Dostoevsky a Russian philosopher, he explained that the complexity and the unpredictability of human consciousness. He explained more on that. And in one of his writings, he said, "Man is a mystery. It must be solved. And if you spend your whole life solving it, don't say that you have wasted time." Artificial intelligence reflects this complexity by producing emergent behavior that are not explicitly programmed, similar to human psychological depth. Now, when we talk about the freedom and will, that is one of the difference between traditional programming and artificial intelligence. Now, in traditional programming, there was no autonomy. It was fully controlled. Every institution was fully controlled. But when we talk about artificial intelligence, there's limited autonomy. It can make independent decisions within constraints. Now, Diogenes, when we talk about Diogenes, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, he valued independence and rejection of imposed systems. When you talk about traditional programming, the result is strict structure and control. When you talk artificial intelligence, the result is partial autonomy with boundaries. And Diogenes said, "I am looking for a human being." Now here Diogenes is challenging artificial conventions. Now this reflects the distinction between mechanical instruction and adaptive autonomy. Now, when I talk about the final highlight in conclusion, the difference between artificial intelligence and traditional programming is not only technical, but it is more philosophical. Traditional programming reflects certainty, structure, and control, but artificial intelligence reflects experience. It reflects probability, interpretation, and emergence. So philosophers such as the Plato, David Hume, Immanuel Kant, Friedrich Nietzsche, Louis Dostoevsky, and Diogenes, and Jesus provided philosophical lenses for understanding this shift from rigid instruction-based system to adaptive intelligent systems. So next I'm going to take you through the types of artificial intelligence: Silicon Valley, East Africa, Kenya. Like, subscribe, follow, hit the like button.